So this is actually week 100 of our weekly discussions. So that's kind of a big deal. We've done this for over 2 years now, and we've skipped a few weeks here and there, but for the most part, yeah, we are in the triple digits, and we'll keep going with these. So thanks so much for being a part of these. And today we're talking about measuring spiritual impacts. Quick refresher, what is EA? Well, first, it's an idea to maximize the good you can do through your career, projects, and donations. It's also a community or movement of many individuals and orgs who care about this idea and who gather around it. And we talk a lot about poverty in effective altruism. We can think about poverty in many different ways. The first way we can think about it is as something material. Sometimes we're talking about how people's poor material conditions, their lack of having physical things like assets or like schools, lead to things like low income or low educational achievement, or even health issues. Sickness is connected to our material bodies. And this is something that we can often easily more or less measure, although never perfectly. So poverty is often a material thing. It can also be a social thing. We can think about poverty as being the lack of our right relationship with others. Some examples of social poverty would be just social isolation, or loneliness, or just a lack of social trust, whether that's in institutions or in other people. So poverty can be a social thing as well. But poverty can also be a spiritual thing. I have two definitions here of spiritual. The first one is from one of those really popular online dictionaries. I forget. The one that everyone uses that isn't Oxford. And they define spiritual as relating to or affecting the human spirit or soul, as opposed to material or physical things. And the Oxford English Dictionary calls this the spirit an animating or vital principle, the immaterial or sentient element of a person. I don't want to get too much in the weeds of the philosophy here about dualism or dual aspect philosophy or materialism or whatnot. I think we can all agree, especially as Christians, that there's a spiritual and inner component to ourselves. We do have an inner life. And that's what I'm meaning when I'm talking about spiritual here, is this sentient element of a person. But also as a Christian, I believe that there are ways in which God influences us on an inner level, and not just through these social or material ways. So there's some challenges in measuring these things, right? And I want to hear more from James about some of these challenges, maybe some of the solutions. But when we think about intangibles, it's much less easy to measure. If we're talking about something like vision, which is often impaired by lack of vitamin A, we might have some issue with our eye. We might not have the right pigments in our retina to be able to see properly. Well, with a lot of charities that work on this problem, it's a very tangible way to measure impact, because we can just measure how their seeing improves. We can ask them, well, what letters do you see before and after this treatment? And we know that things like delivering vitamin A tablets improve people's retinas, and they improve their visions, and we can test that. It's pretty concrete. If we're trying to measure something like someone's spiritual values, like their sense of relationship to God, being loved by God, having hope, and so forth, or believing in Jesus, these are things that are more difficult to measure, and also more difficult to measure honestly. The impact is just less tangible. Second, the theory of change behind the solution, the treatment that we're giving, is a bit more complicated, right? It's all complicated, of course, in every situation. I have here on the left a photo of how our eyes work, and how the light enters in through our corneas, and how it gets refracted, and the signal gets carried through all of these complicated cones and rods and epithelial cells. I wish we had Jay here. He could probably unpack this for us. I mean, it's a huge miracle, right? But there is a theory of change that we can track on a material basis that's simpler, right? And we know that vitamin A, for people who have deficiencies, well, this causes issues with the retina, which makes it difficult for the light signals to enter their eye, and it causes blindness. So we know that we can measure how this changes physically when we provide vitamin A tablets. When we're talking about spiritual programs, whether that's discipleship programs or mentorship or evangelism or whatever it is, the theory of change is let's just say what's less physical. It's less objective. Not to say that it's not important or there isn't a right answer, but there's a lot of competing views about how it is we disciple a person or improve their spiritual values. So here's just a screenshot from a quick Google search of theories of discipleship, and there's a lot of competing views here. The theory of change is not as observable. So I want to hand it over to James to talk about some ways that IDO research, one consultancy for Christian orgs, does measurement of spiritual impact. And yeah, perhaps you could also talk about this challenge of surveying, but we'd love to just give you the floor for the next couple minutes to share more about maybe the challenge, but also some of the solutions. How is it that IDO thinks about spiritual impact? You've developed something like a kingdom impact framework, and you've worked with international care ministries, and I think also you've talked with Compassion International, some other large Christian NGOs about this. So yeah, what are the challenges and some of the solutions you see in the models that you're presenting?
Yeah, great. Thanks, JD. So apologies again, I'm in the car, but hopefully this comes over loud and clear. Should I share for just 2 or 3 minutes? Does that work, JD?
That sounds great. And I hope I took my screen share off. Okay, good.
Perfect. Yeah, so this is a topic that is indeed a great challenge, but one that, yeah, I think is totally surmountable, and that we can, you know, and that we can see already real progress in, and we can tackle logically. Anyway, so when I dived into this problem about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was working in international development, working with some of the most robust kind of program management and impact measurements for a secular international development organization. And I was frustrated, probably like most of you, with the lack of kind of strategy and impact measurement in the Christian world. And so in a nutshell, I mean, fast forward, we now have a number of different validated tools, a Christian character index, but I'll speak to the probably most pertinent application to this group, which is, I think, the work we've done with international development and organizations and charities. And so there's actually a number of spiritual impact metrics, certainly in academia, and then also that individual organizations that like ICM and Hope International had developed. And so what we did was we developed a roundtable, and we pulled together, so we worked first of all collaboratively, and then we pulled together all of the academic measures and sort of practitioner measures we could, carried out a thematic analysis of those, and then went through a robust process. So I did my PhD looking at the resilience of slum dwellers. That's where I learned how to kind of validate surveys. And so using the same kind of methods of construct and face validation, we then have piloted in 4 or 5 countries this what we call the Kingdom Impact Framework for participants, or i.e. in a kind of charitable program setting. And so that's, I guess, some of the progress. I mentioned we also kind of validated a Christian character index. Our friends at ICM are doing some amazing work. They're wrestling even with probably even more challenging aspects of both spiritual formation and kind of whether you're actually able to say if somebody has kind of become a believer. I'll open up that can of worms if anyone wants to go there. But yeah, so we've piloted that in 4 or 5 countries. We've just kind of run through the confirmatory factor analysis, which holds up, which I'm kind of guessing this is a somewhat statistically geeky crowd, so some of that might land with some of you. But I could also talk for hours on the challenges, right? And in a sense, I'll sort of land on this. To me, the challenges with measuring spiritual impact really are similar to the challenges of measuring well-being more holistically, right? That, of course, there's some more theoretical and theological and philosophical challenges, but at the most pragmatic, it's about getting the right questions that get to the real heart of the issue, in this case, the sort of spirit of the issue, and then all the same challenges of social desirability bias and response shift bias and things like this. And my colleague Samuel actually just wrote a paper. And so some of it actually, yes, is about finding the right questions, but actually the same challenges that we've made progress on in terms of measuring social well-being, just in terms of really good, having a really robust methodology, and thinking through, as I said, things like social desirability and trying to avoid those just in the way in which we capture the data. So I'll pause there, but hopefully just to sort of say there's definitely room for hope. We've definitely seen some progress. I would also say that, have I seen many examples of robust measurement of spiritual impact? No. We've done it individually for a number of organizations, but where we're moving towards is we're hopefully about to soon launch the KIF Kingdom Impact Framework Learning Community. As we said, we've developed a measure now, a robust measure with multiple categories that align with, I think you talked about the reconciliation of the four relationships. Brian Fickett's new book talks about that. So the restoration of our relationship with God, self, and others, and creation. But we now want to really share lessons amongst these organizations and do that amongst the learning community. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks for that, James. So I want to end the recording now and just break up into some discussion about these themes. We'll either stay all together or just do two small groups. But great, some questions here. I think we could talk about a lot of different aspects of this, but some that come to mind is one, what exactly are spiritual impacts? What seem like the most important spiritual impacts to you? We could talk about that. Do you think people's sense of being loved by God is a particularly important one to measure, or others is probably a lot? You could ask also about specific beliefs if you thought that particular dogma is especially important. Also, yeah, how effective are surveys in measuring these things? And are these things the same as subjective well-being? Can we just use subjective well-being surveying to do this? And finally, how do we get Christian orgs to adopt the same metrics so that we can maybe do some comparison about what works best across orgs?